All right, thank you very much for coming, everybody. Simon and Andy from Richard Dynamics have come along today to talk to us a bit about personal data exchange. This is a way to safely and securely share personal data between organisations. So it's a thing that was originally started in GDS, but these folks are now taking over themselves and doing an excellent job. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it.
Great, thank you very much. Hello everyone. So Simon and Andy. We're originally at GDS, worked on personal data exchange. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of why we started doing this project, which I'm sure will be very familiar, and so I'll kind of rush through it because it's all stuff you'll be nodding along to, I'm sure, and then talk about kind of the sort of shape of solution that we picked and why we picked that. So basically the place that we started off was essentially it's 2019, people are expecting things to be far more joined up than they currently are. People are kind of very confused. I sometimes have a quote here where one of my friends sends me a iMessage being like, why have I got to submit one piece of government information to another part of government? Like, why isn't the government just doing this for me? So people are expecting direct links. And in our user research, what we found was that people were confused about this. Really, it's because citizens don't really understand the structure of government. Like they see government as government. It's just one thing, right? Like I interact with government. Obviously the reality is quite different. Government is split into departments and they're siloed, and those departments collect information about citizens for the purposes of providing their services. And that all works reasonably well. Actually, there's a reason we've stuck with that model, and it's because we don't want a big brother database of all of the information all in one place. So that works, and it works okay until a service comes along that maybe has like a cross-cutting concern across multiple departments and says, oh, actually, I need to get access to some of that data. But by default, they don't have any kind of link with that department. So actually, what ends up happening most of the time is that they essentially use the citizen as a conduit to get that data. So why is that a problem? Well, the things that they ask citizens to collect are not things that were designed to be proofs. So normally what the service is doing is saying, actually, I need to check your eligibility for something. So maybe it's like you're applying for a disabled parking permit. I need to check that you're actually eligible for that, so you actually have a mobility issue. But the things that people have to submit are not designed to be proofs. They're normally letters. So on the left is the personal independence payment letter. It's 7 pages long. The important information is on page 2. Disability living allowance letter, 8 pages long. Personal information that you need is on page 1. And trying to explain this to citizens is like cause of concern for lots of services everywhere. Citizens are being forced to kind of understand the eligibility criteria for their service, when really that's quite confusing and not easy to explain, and that doesn't even touch on the actual problems with submission. So, like, a lot of citizens don't have the technology to submit something electronically. That's quite difficult. So basically you end up with local authorities having like tons of bits of paper everywhere. And actually most of the sort of solutions to this have really been focused on making the submission easier. So basically kind of using people's kind of smartphones or whatever technology that people have in front of them to actually make the submission of these letters easier, or whatever document it is that they need to submit. But the question is, why is that? Why are we focusing on making submission easier? Like, really, why don't we just take the citizen out of the loop completely, and they don't have to submit anything, and government can just share the data about them, but only for the purposes required? Well, basically the problem is that data sharing is really costly, time-consuming, and confusing. Now, the reason that it is essentially because of risk. Departments have a responsibility to keep the citizen data that they hold safe, and not just kind of hand it out willy-nilly. So they're quite anxious about this. So really what they do is they put in place lots of process to kind of lower the risk as much as possible, both in terms of like a governance process and in terms of like technical process. So they say, oh yeah, you have to have like cybersecurity up the wazoo, you have to have this like proper information security policy, and for a small service, that's actually, not something that they're able to really meet, because if you have a very small service, the cost to set up a data share could be around, I think it was £150,000 was a figure that someone said to us. And for a small service, they're just like, we don't have that budget. Like, how are we supposed to do that link? We can't do it. So really, what we have to do to enable more sharing, what we have to do is kind of lower the risk that departments face by giving out information. And part of that is lowering the value of the data being sent. So instead of sending over a huge amount of information about the citizen, really all we need to be sending a service is the information they need to make a decision. Or, in fact, actually all we need to give a service is the decision. So if a service is trying to decide, is this person eligible for a blue badge, that's all they need to know. Are they eligible, yes or no? A big cost factor as well is the legal agreements. So between departments, you have to have quite a strong legal agreement. And these aren't reusable at all. So we encountered a couple of services where they said, oh yeah, we spent 2 years and several £100,000 on lawyers setting up a legal agreement with various departments for the purpose of data sharing. And then we wanted to do a very similar data sharing, which was basically the same data but for a different purpose. And that was another 2 years, another several £100,000 worth of lawyers. Clearly, again, for regular services, if we're going to touch even kind of 80–90% of services, that isn't quite tenable. So we need to lower the effort of those.
So you know, Lottie launched this week, London Office of Technology and Innovation,
right?
And one of the first 4 projects has been how we might plan London to develop template information sharing agreements. Essentially, it's sort of like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
right.
You might be able to help with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really help accelerate their learning. I can't remember which council's leading. Camden's leading that.
Right. Okay. So that's really good news.
Yeah.
So that's exactly the sort of thing that is what we envisage, is that there's actually a network of people, and they all have like a standard legal agreement that you can use, and then you can kind of put on top of it certain specifics if you need them. And I'll get onto that in just a sec, but that's really good news. And yeah, basically raise the standard of the tech. So a lot of the problems that small services face is they don't have the technical resource to do a really complicated cybersecurity integration. Obviously, this is getting easier all the time, but like the barrier kind of requested by some big departments is really, really high. Some services just can't meet that barrier; they don't have the expertise. So really, we need to be giving services more as a kind of standard, and then allowing and giving them the sort of the bar to which to jump off. So basically, that was the problem that we saw, and we came up with personal data exchange, which was essentially a trusted network. And so instead of having lots of organisations doing bilateral agreements all over the place and having to do these costs every single time, and really for very similar stuff, really the idea is to have more of a network that you can be part of. So if anyone is familiar with digital marketplace, the idea with digital marketplace is that all the suppliers and all the buyers do some work up front and sign some agreements up front and do all their kind of standard legals. It's checked, and then when you want to do procurement in the future, each procurement is easier. And it's kind of a similar idea here, except for data sharing. So actually, instead of doing everything bilaterally every time, you're going to do a certain amount of stuff up front and then reuse that over and over again. So that's the kind of network aspect. The thing that might be most relevant here is the model of data minimal questions and answers that we developed. So I touched on it briefly before, but basically the service only needs to know really if the person is eligible for them or not. So the idea really is to make that the most minimal it can be through kind of a federated network of various kind of intermediaries. I'll show you that in just a sec. But essentially the idea is that they have a question to ask. In the case of Blue Badge, it's, is this person eligible for Blue Badge or not? And as long as they can trust that they can get an answer which is correct, all they really need to know is yes or no. Obviously that's maybe a little bit simple, but there are sometimes there are other things like they might want to know for reporting purposes what channel they come through or something like that. But in theory, data minimal questions and answers is where it's at. Because not only do you make that the kind of the most privacy preserving and the most transparent, but also it lowers the value of the data that they receive. So it's a lot easier to kind of convince departments to give that data out if they're not getting data that is as valuable. And then the other key element here is that this was designed to not just be a digital service, it was designed for use everywhere. So we kind of recognize that a lot of these services and people are not applying for them online. And actually, we need to be doing this not just for citizens of the computer, but for actually staff in a centre or staff over the phone. And actually, all of these different channels, people need to be getting the same experience. You shouldn't be getting like a different response over the phone as you should over the computer. So in order to actually kind of transform the data sharing, you've got to do it everywhere, not just digitally or online. So I'll talk a bit about the data minimal questions and answers. So really the idea here is that you have, in the general case, you have multiple data authorities who know certain things about a citizen. In the general case, none of those data authorities is able to say conclusively whether someone is eligible for something or not. So, for example, the person saying, for the Blue Badge service here, is this person independent payment or not? They don't know anything about whether if this person is blind. So they are able to say something, which is, yes, I know that person independent payment status, but they're not able to answer the actual question. And because in most systems there's not really any aggregation or kind of composition of the questions, what that means is that if you take this thing in the middle out, that this service has to receive all this information. And that, as you can see, this information is a lot more sensitive than this. So the idea really is to have something in the middle which is able to kind of aggregate those answers from multiple data authorities and say, actually, yeah, this is actually any piece of information you need to know. Additionally, kind of forming it as a question is much more data minimal, because obviously you only get to know if the person's independent payment is above the threshold as opposed to exactly what the number is. The point to make here is that this isn't a hub, it's not like a central store of all data, because maybe there are more and they actually only need to be designed to do a specific single use case. So this one is the Blue Badge hub, and that's able to say, yes, you're eligible for Blue Badge or not, and this one's the fishing permit hub, and that's able to say, yes, you have a fishing permit. And although they use the same data sources behind the scenes, there's not a need for them to be aggregated. And actually, it's a good thing they're not aggregated, because the more functions you put into each of these things, the more an interesting attack vector they are for cyber attackers. So actually being able to split them out is quite a valuable thing. The other thing which is kind of interesting and useful about this network is that it allows you to do a kind of reuse property. So if one service or one local authority comes along and wants to do a Blue Badge, they can do that once, they can set it up, they can integrate it. But then also if another local authority or another service wants to come along and ask the same question, they can come along and reuse all the stuff that's already been done and have a much kind of quicker route to market because of that, simply because they can reuse this one question here, and also the legal agreements that come with it. So really what you get is this kind of federated picture, which actually matches the federated structure of how the data is anyway, with these kind of things in the middle, which could be one or none or two or three or however many deep that you need, that can kind of glue it all together. And the questions there is the thing that keeps that minimal. So the key thing is that, as I said before, this is a network, it's not just one-to-one agreements, and actually the way that we formulated it in GDS was with this view that there would be kind of an independent authority who would be able to say, actually, for the benefit of the network as a whole, this is the correct thing, this isn't the correct thing. So in terms of kind of citizen privacy, it's kind of up to this independent authority to work with departments and work with services in order to say, okay, what actually is appropriate use of data here and what isn't appropriate use of data? Like, should this person be getting the raw PIP score, or should they just be getting the answer to this specific question? Like doing that and putting down a policy for what is and is not appropriate data sharing is too difficult to do, like on a piece of paper or from a machine perspective. So really what you need is like humans there who know what they're talking about in order to say, yes, this is appropriate or this isn't in each kind of specific use case. And of course, once they've made that view once, they can reuse that view again and again. Similarly, the function of this independent body is, again, for the whole network to kind of do that minimum level of assurance that you're going to need to onboard people. So they will work with a organisation who's doing this for the first time and saying, oh, actually, yes, your cybersecurity isn't quite good enough, but we'll help you like assure that, or maybe, this is the sort of legal agreement that we need you to sign. And as long as we're publishing you in this network metadata here, we know that like we're basically signing off on the fact that you've done all the legal agreements and all the cybersecurity. So the organisations up here who have the valuable data don't need to worry about it quite as much. So it's kind of standardising across those things, which means that the barrier is lower next time you want to do data sharing. And we work with NCSC on this, so a lot of the features that I kind of touched on were features that we built in to make it much harder to attack from a cybersecurity perspective and also from a fraud perspective. So we're conscious that there are both kind of internal and external, like rogue forces occasionally. So we've designed it basically in mind for that. One of the things that it's possible to do is that those intermediate nodes in the network don't need to know who the person is that they're being asked to compute something on, which means they're actually far lower cybersecurity risk there, because if you attack it and breach it, you don't get to know who anyone is, which is quite valuable. And again, I'm not going to kind of go into detail on this now, but obviously ask about it if you're interested. One of the things we built in was that there's a tamper-evident audit system, so that if something is compromised and someone decides to cause it to give an incorrect answer in a certain case, actually that is evident from the audit information from all the other parts of the system. So we built this system out. We did a huge amount of user research with services, departments, and citizens. We built a MVP for it and a demo, and developed a set of kind of system design principles. Obviously, they're blue links. I can't click on them, but I'll make sure the slides get to you. You can have a look at all that stuff. That's all stuff that's been released by GDS publicly, so go and have a look at it. And that's it. Any questions?
So your data authorities, who is responsible for adding and removing data authorities and ensuring that they come up to the same standards as the rest of the act, or the rest of the chain of it?
Yeah, so in the model that we had, it was the responsibility of that kind of trust authority to say, this is the minimum standard of cybersecurity, information security, governance that we expect from all parties in this network. In terms of whose responsibility is it to add and remove them, essentially the way we envisaged it happening was when a service and a data authority want to come together and do a data share, they would come together to the authority and say, yes, we want to be on board onto this thing so we can do this easier. And of course, once you've got a critical mass of people, it's one of those things that becomes kind of, oh, well, obviously we want to be on this because then it makes up like data sharing we're doing anyway, we're being forced to do anyway by citizens who want to have a more digital experience, easier and less expensive for us. So, yeah.
For your detailed minimal questions and answers,
Yeah.
I was wondering who would sort of determine what the criteria would be for the responses or the answers? Because I would imagine, for example, let's say blue badge, I'm not sure how it works, but different authorities may have different conditions as to what determines who gets a blue badge. How
Right.
would you?
So essentially that would be as it is right now. So actually, in the blue badge case, it's the Department of Transport that decides what the eligibility criteria is. And we don't really envisage kind of changing that relationship. So in that case, it would be Department of Transport that would say, yes, this is what it takes to be able to blue badge. And in fact, it may even be their responsibility to set up that intermediate node and say, actually, we're gonna stand up this piece of technology. Local authorities, you can connect to it. Like we're going to do the integration once with the databases, and then we know that all local authorities are implementing the eligibility criteria in exactly the same way. So at the moment, it's something that they have on paper, which must be the same, but they don't really necessarily have any idea that it's being done without kind of doing any auditing. But using this method, obviously they actually get to implement the logic which says this is how it's done. So essentially, it's the same person that's responsible for that logic already, and in most cases that is a kind of defined by legislation or defined role for something.
So, do you have any, or do you envision any situations where we have multiple authorities on a particular?
That's interesting. In the ones that we encountered, not really, but if that is the case, I mean, there's nothing in the system which is stopping people from saying, okay, actually, for my purpose, these are the criteria, for my purpose, these are the criteria. It's designed specifically to mimic the real world as it is. So it's not kind of it doesn't assume that you have to force people into a specific mold in order to get things done. If you're the authority for something, then you're still the authority for that, but now it's just to do it instead. But of course, there is still in our model, there is still the independent authority which says, actually, that's an interesting data sharing, yes, that's okay, no, that's not okay, maybe you can tweak it to be a bit more like this.
Yeah, I agree. Got a couple of questions?
Yeah.
So, a couple of slightly gnarly ones. So, when you're passing these requests down the chain, so you're saying, tell me about Blue Badge, and then that's then being passed off to different end authorities.
Yeah.
You need to do some kind of user identity that
Yes.
gets passed down, and how do you have some kind of common understanding of what user identity looks like when you ask people questions down the chain? That's the first one.
Yeah, that's good.
That's
great idea. Great
And
question.
then the second one, given that this feels like it's a really good model, but the independent trust authority that you've been talking about isn't going to exist, I think, anytime soon.
Yeah.
What do we do in the meantime?
Okay, that's two great questions. So I'll deal with the first question. So the network metadata that I put up is quite rich. So it describes a lot of information about the data sharing and what is necessary for it to occur. So actually, in that metadata, it says if you want to ask this question, is pip greater than or equal to 8? The database here, in order to match you to that database, you'll need to provide surname, first name, address, or postcode. Maybe down here, it's different attributes. It's like surname, first letter, postcode. And when the query is set up, it basically says, okay, we're going to use these databases, we're going to need to collect these bits of information. That information is then encrypted and sent across only to the databases that need it in order to do matching. And they'll come back and say, yes, I was able to match this person, no, I wasn't. So there's flexibility there in terms of these authorities are free to say, this is what I need in order to match this person, this is what I need. Does that require a standard for what is an address or what is a surname? Maybe, but maybe not. Like, it's possible for that sort of logic to happen as part of the software, to say, oh, well, they want the address in this format, they want the address in that format. We know how to transform those, so we'll just transform it on the fly. So it doesn't necessarily require any standardization. However, what we find is that almost everyone wants the same attributes anyway. So we kind of do envisage like a core set of attributes that people will need to do the identity. Cool. Second question. Who is the trust authority? Yeah, good question.
It's more that seems like a really good idea to have, but my gut feel is that the ICO is probably the best thing to build that out from. But my interactions with the ICO is that they are not going to want to take on that job anytime soon.
Probably not.
So in the intervening, quite possibly number of years, how can we move towards what feels to me like a really good model when that independent trust authority doesn't exist?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a couple of things. One is, as long as everyone agrees that it's a thing that should exist, and if you want to set up a data sharing, for the first time using this network, and actually to be the first people in this network, and you're saying, actually, we both recognise on both sides of this that we want an independent person here. I think it's possible to come up with a completely independent body who maybe looks a bit like a data trust, if you're into that sub-parlance, maybe doesn't, who is able to say, yes, we think this is appropriate. As long as they're kind of independent to a certain degree, like they're an independent trustee, that is fine. It would be nice if it was someone like the ICO who have got a reputation for being correct, but in theory, it could be kind of any independent body who both sides are sufficiently happy is an authority for understanding what would be appropriate. So one of the things we always assumed was that maybe it has people from PCAG on it.
Right.
Maybe it has kind of.
For the folks who don't know what that is.
So PCAG is the Privacy Consumer Advisory Group, which is essentially a independent non-government body set up to kind of ask questions about government's use of personal data. And so the reason that you might want to go to them is to say, actually, we want someone independent and who knows a lot about personal data to come and say, yes, this is appropriate. This is
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
any more?
So on your kind of, it was almost a barriers to adoption list, wasn't it? The things that need to
Yeah.
I kind of, even though your kind of data authorities are talking about obviously data across government departments, I actually kind of think you need to start at the local authority level to make sure that they're consuming data in a way that they understand before you can then get them to work on this higher level. Because I know even in Hackney, we're not sure where the best data for this is, and we're not, you know, we're pursuing this microservice architecture here to try and get to what you're saying should be done cross department there. So I think that's a really huge barrier to adoption and progressing this as well, because what you're proposing makes complete sense if you've already graduated to understanding that this is the sensible way to do things.
Yeah.
But when you're sitting with local authorities that are sitting on one big monolith thinking, oh, just keep propping it up, it'll be alright. They're so far away from graduating into this. Like, how would you kind of attempt to take somebody on that journey to get them to thinking kind of more?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I guess we were always kind of, so I'll kind of answer it in two parts. Shout me if I've not answered this at the end. But
it was a pretty vague question, so how would it go?
I suppose our view was that what happens, what this is, in terms of, so I suppose we see it as a sort of cross-organisation framework. And actually what this is here at the local authority is not necessarily a concern. As in, like, it is a concern, right? But we're not kind of setting requirements on it. So if a local authority wants to have a big monolith, as long as they integrate with the thing according to the technology protocol, that's fine. Because we know that, like, we're never going to solve that problem overnight. But for local authorities who are on that journey already, you could have multiple services like this. Like, there's no problem. There's nothing kind of stopping this thing here asking multiple questions and multiple things at different times. Like, you can do it as a monolith if you want. It's meant to be flexible for that exact reason, which is different local authorities in far different places. The second part I was going to say was, yeah, we've also found that the discovery element is like almost the number one problem. We went and spoke to even lots of small government departments who are quite independent, and the first thing they said was like, yeah, well, forget about the money. Actually, who do we even talk to about this? Like, they're spinning their wheels for like 6 months, saying we want to talk to DWP about personal defence payment. But where's there's no like, hip at DWP.gov. Like, it's literally we have to mine their professional network inside DWP from the outside, and it's just impossible for them to do. One of the things that we always envisioned with this was that, well, the metadata is public, so like everyone can see it, everyone can read it, and actually then you can see who's sharing what and with who. So you can look at the metadata and say, oh, actually, turns out Camden are doing like personal data sharing with DWP for that purpose. Let's just do that, and then you know who it is that you're going to have to go and talk to, because like, that information is in the metadata, or at least it's known to the kind of independent body who it is that's doing that. So yeah, definitely the discovery aspect is a big thing. I guess I've kind of hand-waved over the question a little bit, because what I'm saying is, like, you don't have to go on that journey towards a microservice thing if you don't want to. That's still a problem for people to solve if that's something they want to do.
So I think the interesting question for me, if we're going to move this forward, is what's the practical thing that we can do, because what you're saying about it's being a long way from doing this.
Yeah.
So it feels to me that there's two potentially different parts to this. Part of it is what Matthew raised about talking to Lottie and saying, is there a way to start maybe a panel discussion as well as one platform? I'm sure you folks have been talking to OCD in a similar kind of way, local digital will be there as well. But the other thing that would be really interesting to discuss is that if we wanted to consider doing a prototype in which we're making one decision point available.
Yeah.
So it's like we can answer one question if you haven't had the right data doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What would the stages look like from a technology build perspective to get in there? And do we have even a guess? I'm not asking now, but could we get
Yes.
to a point where we can say that's a month's worth of dev's work, or that's a year's worth of dev's work, or whatever, just so we have an idea of what it might take to get to some kind of pilot stage? Because what I think is really interesting about this, there's the motto of the Internet Engineering Task Force in 2D Standards for the Internet is consensus and running code. It's all to do with having something running that somebody else can interact with.
Yes.
So that as soon as you've got, I think, one or more people who are saying, here's a question that we can answer, people go, what the answer to that? And then
they build it
put
up,
a
yeah.
running prototype and network builds out.
That was always the goal.
Yeah, so the question is, I think the question is, what's the minimum amount of money we can spend to have something that people can say, oh, that's useful.
Okay.
We want to build that. And I mean, obviously, you don't think about that right now.
Yeah, sure.
But
I don't know the figure on top of my
Yeah,
head.
I think it's go away and think about what's the effort feel like.
So I think the thing to add onto that is that I kind of glided over it at the end, but the place that we got to with this at GDS was we had running code, we had implementations of these things that all worked together and actually did the querying. So there is a proof of concept there already. As I said to you before, I think the kind of route is find the first use case for this, build out the sort of integration here with that database, whatever it is, make that technology that's running this fabric a little bit more secure, and then you've got your kind of alpha proof of concept. So it's definitely like the steps are known. It's not like this is all just vaporware. We have technology, and it's kind of nearly ready to go. Basically, it wouldn't be a huge amount of money, but obviously I don't know the figure.
So I think next steps for this is we go and talk to some of our budget holders, and we go and talk to some of our senior tech people and say, I feel that we could be in a good position to, if it's relatively cheap, pilot something to demonstrate to the rest of the local authority network that this is something good that we should be getting into.
Especially if we can find a service that is particularly cantankerous about having to always go to a data source for there, because they're going to be much keener to kind of come on board and go, wait, we didn't have to send an email to G wherever to get the information every 3 weeks. Like, yeah, if we could locate something like that and get their buy-in and get a bit of budget.
And like these services are, from our experience, everywhere. Like you go and speak to someone in the service, they're like, what? I mean, I don't have to ring up DWP and stay on the phone for 30 minutes for every customer. Like, when can you put it in? And they're super keen. Departments are a little bit more tricky, but depending on exactly where you want to start, like there are lots of local authority data sources that can also be like these things here, which could be a useful thing.
I think in addition to that, there's probably more opportunity for collaboration, because like you said earlier, it might be pushed to reconstruct it for like smaller agencies. If there's opportunity for people to come together and build this one thing that everybody can use,
Yeah.
you might probably get more buy-in that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Over the last little bit, I'll also actually finish your round. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening.